Gloria Ramirez, also known as Toxic Lady, was a woman who was admitted to a hospital in California in 1994 with severe health problems. Her case became famous when multiple medical workers reported becoming ill after being exposed to her body fluids. The cause of her illness remains a mystery. A young woman was wheeled into the emergency room of General Hospital in the city of Riverside in Southern California on February 19, 1994, around 8:15 p.m. The woman, clad in shorts and a t-shirt, was awake, but she responded to questions with only brief and sometimes incoherent utterances. She was taking shallow, rapid breaths. Her heart was beating too rapidly to allow its chambers to fill before they pumped, so her blood pressure was plummeting. This woman, the paramedics reported, was 31 years old and had cervical cancer. Her name was Gloria Ramirez. Gloria Ramirez was an ordinary woman living in Riverside, California with 2 children and a husband. Reverend Brian Taylor called her a friend to everyone she met and a joker who brought joy to others. But everything changed that evening in 1994 in the emergency room. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart with electricity. They stripped off her shirt and pressed padded electrodes against her chest. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body and someone noticed a fruity, garlicky odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. To obtain blood for analysis, a registered nurse named Susan Kane swabbed Ramirez's right arm with rubbing alcohol, inserted a catheter, and attached a syringe. And that's when the frenetic yet orderly routine of the emergency room began to break down. As the syringe filled, Kane noticed a chemical smell in the blood. Kane handed the syringe to a coworker and leaned closer to the dying woman to try to trace the odor's source. I thought it would smell like chemotherapy, the way the blood smells putrid when people are taking some of those drugs. Instead, she said, it smelled like ammonia. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorchinsky, a medical resident, who noticed unusual manila-colored particles floating in the blood. An observation echoed by Humberto Ochoa, the doctor in charge of the emergency room, who was helping treat Ramirez. Ochoa, in charge of that night, looked at the blood sample and agreed with the nurses on duty. Something wasn't right with the patient, and it had nothing to do with heart failure. Suddenly one of the attending nurses started to faint. Another nurse developed breathing problems. A third nurse passed out, and when she woke up, she was unable to move her arms or legs. What was going on? A total of 6 people were unable to treat Ramirez because they kept having strange symptoms that were somehow related to the patient. Symptoms ranged from fainting and shortness of breath to nausea and temporary paralysis. Ramirez died that night. Even after the patient's death, the night at the hospital got even weirder. That surreal night would throw Riverside General Hospital into newspapers and TV news broadcasts for weeks, as the frightening possibility of a human body releasing toxic fumes captured the public's imagination. It also triggered one of the most extensive investigations in forensic history. Medical detectives from 10 local, state, and federal outfits examined dozens of potential culprits. From poisonous sewer gas to mass hysteria. She then told me what she believes made her sick. Julie was often hooked up to a breathing machine because she would suddenly stop breathing. This week, she has been feeling much better. It's great to go to sleep and be reassured that you're going to wake up without having anybody breathing for you. However, Julie knows she's a long way from her days as a professionally ranked surfer. Just laying in bed here, I kind of feel like a 90-year-old lady. My lungs still aren't up to par, you know, I just brush my hair and I'm very exhausted. As an emergency room physician, you've obviously hooked up people to all kinds of tubes, breathing tubes, IVs, etc., and now you've been on the other end of it. How did that feel? This experience has completely changed my thinking process. You know, when you do things emergently, sometimes, it's difficult to make the patient comfortable, but I think if I'm in that position, I'll go the 2 extra seconds or a minute to comfort the patient and make, if it is their last few moments, comfortable, because I had a lot of procedures here and it was so scary. The press dubbed Ramirez the toxic lady because no one could get near the body without facing a bevy of medical problems. Yet, no one could point to a definitive cause shortly after her death. Officials conducted 3 autopsies. One occurred 6 days after her death, then 6 weeks, and finally, right before her burial. A more thorough autopsy happened on March 25, more than a month after Gloria Ramirez passed away. That team concluded that there were signs of Tylenol, lidocaine, codeine, and Tegan in her system. Tegan is an anti-nausea medication and it breaks down into amines in the body. Amines are related to ammonia, which could explain the ammonia smell in Ramirez's blood sample at the hospital. More importantly, the toxicology report said that Ramirez had large amounts of dimethylsulfone in her blood and tissues. Dimethylsulfone does occur naturally in the human body as it breaks down certain substances. Once this item enters the body, it disappears quickly with a half-life of just 3 days. However, there was so much in Ramirez's system, it still registered at 3 times the normal amount, 6 weeks following her death. The Forensic Center took up the Ramirez case in early March when a Sacramento criminologist put the Riverside Coroner's Office in touch with the center's deputy director, Pat Grant. On March 25, after some preliminary discussions, the office officially requested Livermore's help and shipped autopsy samples on dry ice to the lab. 3 weeks later, on April 12, 1994, county officials announced that Ramirez died of heart failure due to kidney failure brought on by late-stage cervical cancer. Ramirez was diagnosed with cancer just 6 weeks before her death. The unusual substances in her blood were too low to explain her death, even though there were elevated levels of both ammonia and dimethylsulfone in her body. Although the books on Ramirez's death were now officially closed, there was no explanation for the outbreak of illness among the hospital staff. 34 staff were interviewed who had been working in the emergency room on February 19. People who had developed severe symptoms such as loss of consciousness, shortness of breath, and muscle spasms tended to have certain things in common. The survey found that those afflicted tended to be women rather than men, as well as people who had skipped dinner the evening before rather than those who had a full stomach. It's believed that Ramirez used DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, a sort of wonder drug for relieving various arthritic aches and pains. DMSO is metabolized to become dimethylsulfone, which was found in her system, likely produced by the administration of oxygen by paramedics. As a gas, dimethyl sulfate vapors destroy cells in people's eyes, lungs, and mouths. When this vapor gets into the body, it can cause convulsions, delirium, and paralysis. Of the 20 symptoms described by medical staff that night, 19 of them match the symptoms of people who have had exposure to dimethyl sulfate vapors. The medical staff didn't suffer from mass hysteria or stress. They suffered from dimethyl sulfate poisoning. What caused the dimethylsulfone in Ramirez's body to convert to dimethyl sulfate is still up for debate.